Inside the trunk of a stranger's car, I think I fell in love with the moon in my housemate's eyes. I mean, it could have been the drugs. There was a 99.9% chance it was the drugs. I was still laughing and so was he, and it was the kind of hysterical giggles that reminded me of being a kid, ones I couldn't control. The two of us rolling into each other with every speed bump, which somehow made everything funnier. It started with questions like, "Where are we?" and "Where are we going?" And then quickly developed into, "Since when have you had 3 heads?" Followed by, "When the moon hits your eye like a big pizza pie, that's amore." Car tracks have surprisingly good ambiance. But still, heavily inebriated or not, I found myself mesmerized by the way the moonlight danced around his iris, spiderwebbing across splintered static flesh. Inside my splintered mind, my housemate was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen in my life. I think I reached out with my bound hands, dragging my phantom fingers over moonlit skin. Rowan stopped laughing, his expression crumpling. It was raw and real, and I wasn't used to this version of him. Rowan Beck was the king of avoiding conversations and holding grudges, playing cryptic games instead. But now here he was, inches from my face, far too human for me to comprehend. I found myself spluttering on another laugh. This man was possessed by the moon, a flesh-eating monster who had killed me multiple times for his own selfish needs. So why was my heart jumping around in my chest? "So," Rowan murmured. He leaned closer, and in my extremely drugged mind, I forgot about the whole eating me thing. I just saw her, expanding, filling, polluting his eyes with ethereal light. It was so bright, so pretty and comforting and warm, and I wanted to envelop myself inside it. I wanted it to take him over completely. Another speed bump brought us closer, and his lips found the bridge of my ear. "Why did you do it?" His words hung in my mind long after our unfortunate car ride. Like a tape being rewound, the memory seeped away, and panicking, I blindly grasped for another piece of my body parts, plunging myself inside my memories. No longer illuminated in the warm glow of our hallway, I was surrounded by darkness. It was so cold. I was barefoot, my arms tied behind my back with a tough rope. My hands weren't alone. 3 pairs were entangled with mine. 3 bodies bound to me, though I could have sworn my restraints were loosening. The dark didn't make sense at first. It was an endless stretch of oblivion in front of me. Then, shapes started to bleed into existence. An orange light flickered into view, getting closer and closer, illuminating the room. I was inside our basement. When I tipped my head back, a skylight I'd never seen before loomed over me, and I glimpsed a sliver of moon poking behind eerily lit clouds. I was crying. My emotions were overwhelming, feral, filling my brain with poison. I had to get out. The words were on my tongue, and I was screaming silently into the lit-up dark. I had to get out. I had to get out. Yanking one wrist free, I exhaled a heavy breath. I didn't know. "Shut up." Rowan's voice was slurred from getting whacked in the head. I could still see his motionless form on the ground, and at that moment, I thought he was dead. Part of me wished he was dead, because then he wouldn't have to go through this. "It's not your fault." He let out a shuddery laugh, leaning his head on mine. "I mean, yeah, I did try to tell you multiple times there was something wrong with the crazy bitch, and we're probably going to fucking die because you were too naive, but..." "Rowan," Kaz spoke through his teeth, pulling at his bindings. "You're making it worse." "We're going to die?" Imogen squeaked. "We're not going to die," Kaz said softly. "It's okay, Emmy. Breathe. You can breathe, can't you? Come on. In and out. No, I can't breathe. In, Kaz said calmly, breathing in and then exhaling. And out. Just keep breathing. I'm sorry, but what are breathing exercises going to do? Rowan, now slightly more awake, hissed. Like she said, we are going to die. There's no sugarcoating it, no magical escape. We are going to die. That woman and her equally psycho friends are fucking nuts. Kaz didn't answer. I pulled up my loose restraints again. I can get us out of here, I managed to hiss out. What? Kaz twisted his head. How? I can get the cops. You're kidding. All I could think about was escaping or staying, fight or flight, dying or survival. My body hummed with adrenaline. I lunged forward, my bare knees grazing the concrete floor before a hand grasped mine, his nails digging into my skin. Desperation. I felt it emanating from him because I knew he knew. Rowan knew me better than I knew myself. Don't, he said in a sharp sob. I know what you're going to do, and you can't, okay? You can't run. Frustration gritted my words between my teeth. I'm getting help, I gasped out. Sure. I tried to shuffle away from him, but he wouldn't let go. There's got to be someone. No. Rowan tightened his grip, and I felt myself crumble. Part of me resented him for stopping me from running, and another part of me despised myself for even thinking about fleeing. Rowan's fingernails dug into my skin, a surprising anchor. No, you're not going to run away like you always do. His voice was harsh and raw, like a knife plunging through my chest. Like when your parents came to visit and you locked yourself in your room, leaving us to face them. Like when you saw a spider and forced Kaz, who was mid-job interview on Zoom, to get rid of it. Rowan, Kaz warned, his tone darkening significantly. She needs to know. Yes, but does she need to know now? Rowan sighed. Fuck, he muttered to himself like he was going to regret his next words. Imogen was pregnant 3 months ago. A hot, suffocating sensation climbed up my throat, but before I could speak, Rowan pressed on, his bound hands finding mine, stopping me from diving to my feet. Did you even care, Nin? His hiss was bitter, more of a laugh. Or were you too wrapped up in yourself to notice your best friend throwing up every day? He was right. 3 months prior, I was embedded in classes in a group presentation. I didn't know. I managed to choke out. Rowan snorted. Yeah, because according to Imogen, every time she tried to tell you, you either brushed her off or changed the subject. You promised you'd be there for her, especially since her parents aren't, yet you talked about your own trivial problems instead. You pushed her away and didn't even fucking care. Imogen said nothing, but I could hear the hitch in her breath, the quiet shudders of her sobs. I didn't know, Imogen, I repeated, the words tasting bitter like barf. She didn't respond for a moment, but her clammy hands found mine, squeezing with a silent plea. Rowan fought with my hands, keeping me from tearing away from him. This is what I'm trying to tell you. You're selfish, but I don't hate you for it. You've been running away your whole life, and you even admit it's a flaw. But you've never tried to help yourself. His voice cracked, splintering apart. You're going to leave us, and I hate that I know that. I hate knowing exactly what you're thinking and what you're going to do, but for once, I'm begging you. Don't think about yourself. He squeezed my hands tighter. I don't want to die, Nin, he whispered, his head flopping onto my shoulder. I'm 23 years old. Do you think I want to die down here at the hands of some psychotic werewolf-worshipping cult? They're not a cult, Imogen whimpered. Stop saying they're a cult. You're freaking me out. Rowan shoved her. What else could they be? I don't know. Maybe it's a prank. Hilarious prank, Kaz muttered. Rowan entangled his fingers with mine. I tried to pull away again, refusing to accept my fate, that I was going to die with them. I know you're scared, he breathed. But running away isn't the answer. You keep telling yourself that because you're only thinking of your own survival, which, sure, I can understand. Humans are selfish. But I want to believe you won't be selfish this time. I didn't think about his words when I yanked away from him, feeling his hand slip from mine. The connection we'd had for the last 2 years ignited into nothing. I know you won't leave us. His words echoed in my mind as I lunged forward, tearing myself from the bindings once my wrists were loose. I violently tugged from Kaz's restraints. He didn't move, didn't try to struggle. Instead, his head dropped, a sob escaping his lips. You wouldn't do that, right? Rowan was still speaking with a choked sort of irony as I crawled forward on my hands and knees and took off in a stumbled run. Don't look back, I thought dizzily, my head spinning. So I didn't. I kept running, making it to the basement stairs where glowing candles had been placed on each one, only for a figure to appear at the top, followed by several others. As they descended, I staggered back, and above me, a perfect full moon graced the skylight, drenching the room in light, carving a circle around my housemates and me, a circle that stopped halfway up the stairs. I tried again, forcing my legs to run. My brain told me I could get past them. I could break through their human barrier blocking the door. I knew it. Rowan ducked his head. She's running away. His words stung, but he was right. I was desperate to get out of there. But something else was stopping me. Something else was preventing me from stepping out of the circle of light. As the figure took slow strides down the steps, the moon lighting up her face, I realized youth did not equal beauty. The woman who I'd let into our home was dressed in mystifying white. Carrying her own candle, she regarded me with a smile. She didn't speak when I tried to run again, and a man's arms wrapped around me, suffocating my screams. Let her run, the woman said, her voice a melodic murmur. Like she was singing into my head. She will regret it, she said, situating herself outside the circle of light while the rest of her group moved in graceful strides, stepping inside it. Her eyes darkened when she laid eyes on me. Imagine abandoning your friends to escape such a beautiful fate, choosing to die alone instead of with them. Young lady, you must be mad to run away from something like this. Her eyes, I wish they sparkled with madness, with lunacy. But they were as clear as my own when I stared into the reflection of the dagger curled between her fingers. The man holding me forced me to my knees, and she tipped her head back, her gaze going to the skylight in awe. I mean, just look at her. She is beautiful. The woman nodded at Kaz, Rowan, and Emmy. Wouldn't you agree? It's the moon, Rowan spluttered, struggling wildly. What do you want us to do, clap? Rowan! Kaz's cry was shrill. Shut the fuck up! I don't understand, Imogen spoke up. Why are you doing this? We didn't do anything! I have $3,000 in my savings, Kaz said. I can get you more. Young man, the woman feigned horror. Why on earth would we hurt you? This is a blessing, a gift. You knocked us out and tied us up in our own basement, Rowan gritted through his teeth. I think that qualifies as hurting." The woman sighed, her eyes trained on the skylight. She took slow strides toward them, and as she neared, she began to speak in a soft voice, almost like a lullaby. When she situated herself behind Imogen, my heart jumped into my throat. Something burned inside me. An urge to run, to get out. But there was nowhere to go. Every time I tried to step outside the semicircle of light, it pushed me back. She pushed me forwards and I dropped onto my knees. It may not seem like it now, but a time once existed thousands of years ago when humanity, or at least the citizens of this town, lived in the dark. They believed that if they lived through 100 days and 100 nights of darkness, she would take notice. And she did. How could she not? Her laugh chilled me to the bone. They rejected the sun. For her, all it took was embracing the desire to chew on their own flesh as sustenance, a final promise to her that they were hers, and always would be. And in turn, she carved away their second skins, their outlines, granting them abilities far beyond their imagination. Some rejected their humanity completely, able to shift their skins to one of a beast. "So, werewolves," I heard Kaz mumble to himself. Stepping behind Rowan, the woman ran her fingers through his hair, yanking his head back when he cringed away. "Our outlines are what make us human, what attach us to the earth and force us to live our lives without risk. They are our terrestrial prisons, forcing us to live as the sun desires, in the blinding, piercing light." "The moon is bright too," Rowan spat, only for her to slap him across the face. "Without our terrestrial outlines," she continued, "all of that stops. Without our outlines, we are no longer tethered to the ground. We can be twisted and blurred against human physics. We can be edited, rendered, copied in any way she wants. We can live without logical thought and emotions, her beloved puppets she can use for her own personal gain. To her, human beings on Earth are her soldiers." Her smile dampened. Now, the town lived on with these abilities. We lived without our outlines, drowned in the darkness and her light until certain people grew greedy, wanting more from her. More power. They demanded more. Her gaze found the skylight. The ability to spread this phenomenon far and wide across the globe. Even the ability to see sunlight once again and shift back to their human forms. Children were curious about what it looked like, going to extreme lengths to escape the mirror she placed. And in retaliation, she gave them what they wanted. The sun, which cursed them with their outlines once again. Circling around my housemates like a shark, I could tell she was nearing the end of her story. Now, the human race is weak. The people of this town are pathetic, living in the scorching sunlight. And we must return to the old ways to find our way back to her. And for that, we choose you." This time she directed her words at the skylight before her eyes found mine. "Of course, we can't use ourselves. Every generation since has been cursed with a permanent outline. Even if we wanted to sacrifice ourselves, she would never take us. Did it ever occur to you that maybe you're just out of your mind? Rowan shrieked, trying to dive to his feet. There's no such thing as a terrestrial outline. You're fucking demented. The woman's eyes darkened. You, however, she continued, her lips curving into a smirk. You have outlines. We should have no problem skinning them directly from your souls and grant us her beautiful light once again. Running the blade down Kaz's cheek, her eyes sparkled. Bolivia House used to be their place of solace, where they would surrender themselves under a full moon once the bells chimed midnight and give their outlines to her light. The clock on the mantelpiece struck midnight, almost as if on cue, and the hair on my neck stood up. Do it. Now, she ordered, the group beginning to circle my housemates. I used that chance to escape, but I was still trapped in the circle. By killing the first slayer and perforating the soul, the outline will be forced to detach itself from the living host. Her voice was practically a moan. Only then will they show themselves. Wait, Kaz whispered, struggling violently. Please, I don't want to fucking die. His eyes found mine. Go on then. His lips curled back in disgust. Get the fuck out of here. I couldn't move. The lead woman's lips moved, curling into words that must have pierced Emmy's heart. I saw her plead, her frenzied eyes trying to find an escape that didn't exist. We were trapped in the circle. Imogen screamed, flailing, sobbing. She didn't stop until the woman's knife pierced the top of her head. I watched it split her skull open. Puddled moonlight illuminated bright, intense red dripping, pooling down Imogen's face. I expected her eyes to flutter shut, but they stayed open, wide and cartoonish, her lips curved into the start of a scream which never hit the sound barrier. They must be severed. For our ancestors' greed, we will sever them, were the woman's words in a melody. She wasn't dying. Emmy was in some middle place, lips trembling as red continued to flow. The woman twisted the blade, causing my housemate's trembling lips to part slightly as if gasping. I watched rivulets of red splatter the ground, and I couldn't comprehend why there was so much red. It was so fast. 1 minute Kaz was screaming at me to run, and then his blood splattered across the concrete floor. When the woman stepped in front of Rowan, she dragged the blade across his forehead. His eyes were frenzied and terrified. Rowan was aware that Kaz's head had gone limp on his shoulder, his body trembling with sobs. Don't go. Rowan's whimper kept me imprisoned, paralyzed. Please, don't fucking leave me, he choked on a sob. Not this time. The leader hummed. You are perhaps my favorite, she chuckled, entangling her fingers in Rowan's hair. Her eyes flicked to me. The two of you have strong feelings for each other. Do you not? Before I could respond, she laughed. You hate this young man. You feel beneath him. She stroked the blade across Rowan's throat and he flinched. You, my darling, feel like a bug under his foot. Pressing the blade down, she dug it in and Rowan screamed. And you, young man, the boy who hides behind a wall. The woman held down his squirming shoulders. You despise her for thinking she is the center of the universe. You hate that you have feelings for what you call a selfish, entitled, childish brat. To my confusion, she handed me the knife. In that case, why don't you do my job for me? Rowan let out a strangled sob when I dared meet his gaze. The word no was suddenly violently pulled from my throat. Moonlight struck, taking me off guard, turning my brain into mush. It seeped into my blood, fashioning my lips into a dreamy smile. She was right. I resented him for being better than me at everything. I hated his pretentious big shot attitude that he couldn't take anything seriously. I hated the way he looked at me sometimes. Like I was beneath him. Selfish, she sang inside my head, and my lips moved, my fingers grasping around the knife. I sang along. Slashing Rowan's chest, I relished in the seeping, pooling red gushing out. Entitled. I plunged the blade through his skull, deep enough to reach his brain, twisting the blade until he was screeching, wallowing, begging for death. I sang. Childish. I wanted him to stop looking at me, beads of thick red seeping down his face. Brat. I wanted him to die slower, so that he would suffer. His half-witted gaze held mine, and I knew I would never forget the look on his face. Not hate, disdain, or resentment. Something more powerful than hatred, a burning, scalding something that forced me to look away. I heard his gurgled sobs, his thinning breath, and then... nothing. When the knife slipped from my hands and I regained control of my thoughts, the melody leaving my mind, Rowan was already dead. The woman let out a sharp cry that morphed into a laugh. As if they were puppets on strings, all three of their heads tipped back and the light in their eyes vanished, filled with a growing spark, bleeding moonlight. Kaz's lifeless eyes blinked before his head dropped, followed by Imogen. Rowan. I think he was clinging on, blinking rapidly, fighting it, before she broke through completely, bleeding into his iris. Moonlight expanded across the room once again, this time catching every surface, drenching every face, before slowly moving away, leaving us once again in flickering candlelight. I waited for them to move. But the red had stopped. Imogen's head fell limp, Rowan's resting on Kaz's shoulder. There was a moment when I thought I was going to laugh, hysterical bubbles creeping up my throat. I felt myself hit the ground, crawling toward them before I was yanked back. There was so much blood, slick on my palms and tainting my fingers. I was covered in them. I lifted my head, my throat raw with a strangled cry before I caught sudden movement. A shadow, a static thing bleeding, blossoming between reality and something else I couldn't register. It was at the corner of my eye, and following it, I found myself blinking at flashes of movement creeping across the back wall. It was a shadow, a silhouette mimicking a human figure. 3 of them. The first one dived forwards and seemed to be the most desperate to escape. It took a chance, and despite not seeing an identity, I knew it was terrified. I knew it was frantic, calculating its moves before it took them. It dived across the room, sticking to the wall, pressing itself against it. But before it could make it up the stairs, the man who had wrapped his arms around me whipped out a hand, grabbing the thing by its slender neck, and slit its throat. I didn't even see a throat. I didn't see the shape of one or an indication that it even had one. But I did see its reaction. Its staggering, stumbling as it hit the ground before bleeding into the concrete and disappearing right in front of my eyes. The other 2 were slower. One stayed back, as if it was guarding my housemates' bodies, while the other took a stumbled step forwards before falling to its knees. I saw it give up before it was brutally murdered too. It's weird. Watching these things, I knew they were shadows or outlines. But they acted human. They acted with fear and pain when they were caught and killed, just like my housemates. The last shadow attempted to dart into the darkness itself, but this time the woman took care of it, wrapping her hand around its throat and snapping its neck. When it was gone and the moon had crept behind a cloud, I remembered how to move. I tried to crawl up the stairs, but another figure kicked me down them and I landed flat on my back, only to find the woman looming over me. "You are a fool," she said, pulling and yanking me to a sitting position. Her ice-cold fingers grazed my neck, grasping a tight hold of my ponytail and yanking my head back so I got a good look at the skylight. And there she was, coming back into focus and filling the sky with her light once again. A low murmur bloomed in the back of my head. Singing. It was enough to stop my struggling, my screams as the force of her knife bit into my throat. She didn't press pressure yet. Instead, she was waiting for one last chance. "You are an interesting one," the woman hummed. "I want you to bow to them." She laid me down in front of my dead housemates, bowing my head as if in prayer, as a shadowed figure forced a crown of adorned bone onto Rowan's curls. "Bow to your future kings and queen." I don't remember the exact time she killed me for the first time, because I was too busy staring up at the moon, and just like she was agreeing with the woman, the moon herself smiled down at me, emphasizing her words. Then I was aware of something sharp cutting across my throat. It felt like a zipper. When I was a kid, I had a sweater with a zipper my mom had brought home from a thrift store. I used to zip it all the way up until it was around my neck, and Mom yelled at me thinking I was going to choke myself. That memory was some kind of sweet as I felt my body go limp. I felt warm wetness drip down my skin. Not enough to kill me. Karma. For abandoning them. Curled up on the ground, I choked on my own breaths, trying and failing to suck oxygen into my lungs. Once again, I swore I detected movement through my own flickering lashes. I saw it bleed into existence, a static outline, a shadow which, upon realizing itself, stared down at its own blurry hands before diving to its feet. I don't think they were expecting my outline. I watched the thing flatten itself against the wall before creeping into the dark. I was waiting for it to reappear, or the thing to end up with the same fate as the others. The knife bit in again, just as something moved in the corner of my eye, a twitching head, and this time it was the closing blow. That was the very first time I died, and the first time I came back. Both of which I cannot remember. But the pieces of me inside Rowan's freezer did. When I came to, I was slick with sweat, still cramped inside Rowan's freezer. I only had to slightly move for them to start pounding on the lid. 2 hours later, I finally heard my housemates leave the closet. Once I was sure they were gone, I climbed out of the freezer, risking a peek through the gap in the door. I was met with that same light. They had torn down the protection on Kaz's window, and the room was swimming in it, every surface, every corner bleeding in that eerie glow. Despite the moon's lumine, her light filling every crevice and corner, none of my housemates had shadows. Kaz paced, chewing on something. Imogen curled up on the floor, hidden behind her blonde hair. Rowan knelt in puddled moonlight, head tipped back, eyes closed. I think she was singing to him, numbing his mind of all that pain he wanted to stop. Exhausted, I passed out when they eventually left the room. When I opened my eyes, I was in my own bed. There was a figure hanging over me and I panicked, crawling back, a scream choked in my throat. But when I gathered myself, I was just looking at Imogen, who was no longer a mindless monster, still draped in strips of what was left of yesterday's clothes. I could still see noticeable smudges of scarlet ingrained into her skin. It was her eyes I noticed first, still half-lidded, glinting with the familiar shadow of the moon. Her cheeks were still gaunt and skeletal, skin paper-thin and paling. After fashioning them into her mindless, cannibalistic soldiers, the moon had made me the only thing they could eat. Imogen smiled, and the skin around her mouth splintered apart, leaking moonlight. "Morning," she croaked, dragging a hand through the tangles in her hair. "Listen, I know you probably want to talk, and I know we have a lot to talk about, but there's something you should know." My housemate's lip curled. "Actually, 2 things." Her hand was warm, human and yet also hollow, like a static photograph. Her nails dug in suddenly, and I bit back a cry. "Can we keep what happened last night between us?" she whispered. "At least for now." Imogen remembered. Well, she remembered the first half of the night before. I could only nod. What else could I say? I didn't just leave them because of my own selfishness. I watched them die. I murdered Rowan Beck in cold blood, puppeteered by a celestial light. I let Imogen take my hand, trying to ignore her stumbled feet, how she could barely walk. She pulled me out of my room and down the stairs. Halfway down, though, I knew exactly what she was talking about. The boys were standing at the bottom, Kaz leaning against the wall, his gaze on his phone, Rowan hiding his head in his knees. They had cleaned up, at least. Rowan was draped in his robe, Kaz half-dressed in a shirt. It was hard to look at them after seeing them in the memory I'd gotten back. Still human. The 2 of them were ready to collapse, clearly trying to suppress a feral urge forcing them to eat me. I noticed Kaz was leaning his weight into the wall, and Rowan's legs were shaking. Doing my best to ignore the state they were in, I focused on the front door swamped in darkness. The clock on rustic walls said it was almost 9 a.m. And yet, it was dark outside. "It's 9 a.m., I said. "And it's pitch black?" "Great observation, genius. Is there anything else your Einstein mind can point out?" Rowan got to unsteady feet. He didn't turn around to look at me, and I didn't blame him. He groaned, burying his head in Kaz's chest. "So much for researching the full moon cycles. The moon can do whatever she wants with us and this town. She just straight up turned off the fucking sun." "Go to bed." Kaz pulled a face, inching away from him. "I'm not a pillow." "No." Kaz sighed, straightening up and wafting Rowan away like a fly. "There was a full moon, which explains why we can't remember a thing." He screwed up his face. "Why I woke up." Kaz drifted off and I felt nauseous. "Anyway," he heaved out a breath. "I've checked everywhere. It's just us. The rest of the world is fine." He held up his phone and I glimpsed the Twitter trends he was scrolling through. "I'm guessing this is just the start. She's made it dark so it's easier for her to strike, and when she does, we're powerless." "Yeah. Without eating," Rowan said, leaning against the wall. He sent me a look. I could still see a slight smear of red on his lips. He licked it away, his mouth curving into a scowl. "We need breakfast." "Hey," Imogen shot him a glare. "Watch your words. We have refrigerated Nin." "Yeah, but I want fresh Nin." Kaz shot him a look and he backed off. Rowan rolled his eyes. "I appreciate the house meeting, really, guys. There's nothing more I love than hanging out, solving the mystery of our undead antics." Rowan made a point of not even acknowledging me. "But is anyone going to talk about the elephant in the room?" He nodded to the lounge. "There's a massacre of bodies under our table, and not one of us is going to say a word." His fingers tightened around his Ray-Bans, the lenses splintering. "At least he wasn't hiding it anymore." Imogen shook her head. "Like I said, not yet," she said. "There's something else." He cocked a brow. "Does that also involve possible Armageddon outside?" Shoving both of them, Imogen grabbed and yanked the boys upstairs, gesturing for me to follow. This time, Imogen led us into my room. It was just how I'd left it. Except when I looked up following Imogen's finger, something was scrawled, clawed into the ceiling. Not English. Rowan stared down at his nails. "Did we do that?" he hissed out, diving onto my bed. Standing on his toes, he dragged his hands over the carvings, his eyes going wide. They were deep enough to leave indentations in the wall. He nodded at Kaz. "Well?" Jumping off my bed, Rowan winced, seemingly regretting that decision when he couldn't straighten up. "What does it say?" Kaz, who looked out of breath, leaning on my bed frame, shot him a scowl. Every time I looked at him, at all of them, they were deteriorating faster, but ignoring it, ignoring their current state. "You're kidding. You think I can read hieroglyphics?" "You're the smart one," Rowan grinned. "I'm the idiot and Emmy's the princess. You studied Egyptians and shit at school, right?" "When I was in 4th grade." "They're not hieroglyphics," Imogen grumbled. Her lapse in mood was concerning. "Well, what about the dead people?" Rowan said. "The smell is driving me crazy." Imogen shot me a panicked glance, chewing on her nails. "There's rubber gloves and trash bags in the kitchen. We can dispose of them for now." Kaz was frowning at me. "And what happens when their friends come sniffing around here?" "I haven't figured that out yet." "So, can we admit this right now, then?" Rowan folded his arms. "The full moon sent us full Teen Wolf and we ripped them apart." There was a pause and all eyes fell on me. Kaz spoke first, leaning against the wall. "What actually happened last night? I think I blacked out after the protection ritual, and I specifically told you not to track Nin down." He shot a pointing glare at Rowan, who resembled a kicked puppy before he broke the awkward silence with a laugh. "Okay, come on," he said. "She knows. Nin's known since that first night Emmy beat me at Monopoly and the moon got us. I have a vague memory of a car ride. And yes, under the influence, I may have told Nin about our eating habits." "What?" Imogen squeaked. "But I'm dealing with it," I said, swallowing barf. "Mostly." I saw the exact moment Kaz Delacroix internally lost his shit. "Wait," he said. "You told her?" "Was I supposed to not tell her?" Rowan snapped back. No. That was the whole fucking point." "Well, maybe she needed to know." "Needed to know that we eat her to survive?" The two talking over each other sounded like noise in my head. Kaz's laugh was out of character. "You told her everything." "Not everything." "Oh, right." His tone dripped sarcasm. "If looks could kill, permanently, Rowan would be an actual dead man." "So you just happened to casually mention that we have to eat her to survive, and then complain to me that she ran away." I had never seen Kaz this mad. In a single movement, he grabbed Rowan's shoulder, slamming the boy into the wall. "Are you fucking brain dead?" "Yes, I'm both of them." Kaz's expression faltered, but he backed off. "You're an idiot." "We all know I'm an idiot." Rowan's lip pricked. He straightened up, unfazed by Kaz's strength. "How else were we going to tell her?" Imogen looked like she was going to throw up, the skin around her eyes splintering. "No, this isn't okay," she said. "We can't expect her to, you know." She screwed up her face. "I'm sorry, but would you guys happily agree to being eaten alive?" "It's the least she could do," Rowan scoffed. "She's the reason why we're like this. We're reminded of that every time we don't eat." His voice choked up and I wasn't expecting it. "I got a knife through my head." "We all got a knife through our head," she shrieked. "Just stop, all right? Let's think about this." "Why?" Rowan challenged. "Why are you so scared to admit that we're like this because of her? We haven't eaten, so we're being punished. And right now, I have a 1080p resolution movie screen replaying my death." "Look, we'll be okay if we eat. Kaz cut in, raking his fingernails down his face. If we eat, we can function. So Rowan, please stop fucking talking. You're giving me a migraine. Rowan nodded. Exactly. We need to eat. As usual, Kaz is the logical one. If we don't eat, you know what she'll make us do. Imogen stepped back. You're gross. Rowan sighed. No, Imogen. I'm right. Poppy called me, thank God. Looking at my phone screen, I had 8 missed calls from her. When I left the room answering the phone, her voice was sharp, piercing my ear. Nin! She squeaked. Have you seen Sam? I don't know what possessed me to end the call. Sam had gotten away. I'd seen him, out of the corner of my eye, darting right out the front door. Then why did I feel sick to my stomach? The night before, my housemates had stuck around for most of the night, before disappearing before dawn. Something ice cold slipped down my spine. What did they do after that? Where did they go? When I headed back into my room, Emmy had retired to her room to freak out, Kaz passive-aggressively clanging around in the kitchen making bacon, despite being vegetarian. Rowan was still frowning at the ceiling. I figured my housemate wanted to be alone, and I really wasn't looking forward to the inevitable conversation we'd be having now that I had my memories back. When I took a step back, though, he climbed back onto the bed, reached out his hand, tracing his nails across plaster. Kings, he muttered, digging his fingernails into the indentations. You can read that? I blurted. He nodded. Not well. It's all squiggly. But when I really focus on it, I can sort of read it. He pointed. See? It reminds me a little of, hiragana and katakana, but it's a cocktail of both with added hieroglyphs. The thing that looks like a house? It says kings, while the rest is a blur. But if I were to guess, this here... His finger moved. This thing? The squiggle that looks kind of like an S? I think it says crown. King's crown, I said, frowning at the symbols. Rowan's lips twitched. Crown, or crowned kings would make more sense. You can read an ancient language? His expression darkened significantly. Yep. No thanks to you. So you are werewolves, I said, more to myself than him. You're like the origin of them. He twisted around, his mouth curving into a smile. Fuck. Maybe we are. I found my opportunity. Rowan. Nope. His tone darkened. We're not doing this. He was so fucking stubborn. I tried again. Can we... His head snapped up, eyes narrowing. Can we what? Plucking the Ray-Bans from where they settled on his head, he put them on quickly, hiding moonlit eyes I could still see in the shadow of his iris. Do you want to talk, Nin? What do you want to talk about? I didn't speak, and after watching me choke on my words for a while, he drew back and danced away. I'm kinda hungry, he said with a fake smile, and even faker enthusiasm. Jumping down, he let out an exaggerated sigh. I wonder what's for breakfast. Toast, maybe? Oatmeal? If there's one thing my housemates suck at, it's talking. The boys seem more inclined to talk now, but Emmy is ashamed of what she is and what she does. A few hours ago, I watched them start to revert to static, growing increasingly more feral and animal-like. Imogen curled up in her room, pressing her head into her arms, while Kaz and Rowan kept going to the lounge, circling the bodies they were supposed to be cleaning up. They didn't drop hints, but they didn't have to. So, I went to my room like every other full moon, and I lay down on my bed. I took a sleeping pill, but I still felt it. I felt their warm arms around me, carrying me downstairs. Shit, they didn't even wait until I was dead. I don't think they were thinking clearly enough to have a cohesive plan. They reverted back to basic survival instinct, ripping me apart. Like I said, I didn't feel all of it in its entirety. Just the start of it. Teeth piercing my stomach and then my arms and legs. Luckily, that's when it went dark. I woke up with that same hollow sensation, only just glimpsing Imogen heaving my skeletal corpse across the hall. There's a town meeting tonight. Cass said he's going to scope it out and figure out what's going on. When I get into class, I'm going to try and find Sam. If he's not among the dead my housemates killed, where is he?